My real question, and I don't think you're wrong on Boo Corrigan being, kind of an empty suit in this situation. Nor should we be assigning blame to him. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but in every room, there's an alpha, there's a leader, there's someone. Barry Alvarez forever. At the beginning of this, was the true puppet master to this. So I am curious, in this particular room, who was the puppet master? Who was the person actually pulling the levers? Who was the person making the persuasive argument? Because this is kind of like how we look at Mark Emmert from the NCAA, right? You can just easily dismiss him as a poor leader or blame everything on him, or you can take the opposite. Well, that's the job. You sign up, you take the bullets, that's what you do. But there has to be something to leadership, right? And I think that's where you can be critical of Boo Corrigan and without being in the room and say, I still don't. Were you the alpha? Were you the one actually running this room? Yeah. I don't know. We know from history, first couple of years, it was Barry Alvarez behind the scenes pulling every lever, making sure that the Big Ten was taken care of.
I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't think Boo Corrigan is that guy. I don't think that's what he is. I think Boo kind of reads a room. He's a little bit like Tofu at times. I mean, we can see this with the whole ACC conference expansion argument. Boo was not exactly out there making definitive statements. He was just kind of going, all right, well, where's the room going? He's not the alpha in the room. And that's fine. I'm not using it as a knock. I'm just saying that.
No, I'm genuinely curious, though, who was in this situation. I would like to know. I just don't think
he's that guy. Now,
that's who you want to blame.
You do lead me to a macro point that I want to transition to. But you talked about the political football that is required to push your agenda to get your teams in. You bring up Barry Alvarez. This gets me to Jim Phillips, ACC commissioner, and how Jim Phillips does not have that dog in him when it comes to political football. I think it's abundant. If it wasn't abundantly clear before, it's certainly clear now for people who might have been holding out hope that maybe Jim Phillips would get it right. Turns out that every time Jim Phillips acts, it's about 2 steps behind where he should have been. They released a statement. Well, the statement, man, too late. You should have been able to, if you and I, Joe, can see these scenarios playing out in real time, why wasn't Jim Phillips front and center getting in front of it to direct the narrative? All right. I don't want to turn this segment into me bashing Jim Phillips. But I do think that Jim Phillips is a symptom of a larger problem for the ACC. And I think about a decade's worth of mistakes, both in terms of how they've gone about constructing their conference and how they go about talking about their conference, finally came home in the worst possible time and leaving Florida State out of it. This is a decade's worth of fooling around and finally finding out at the worst possible moment and probably accelerating what was already the inevitable end of the ACC. If you want to tell me, and I saw this plenty in my email, I saw this plenty on my social media mentions, whether it was on Twitter or Threads, that the ACC is dead. You know what? I have no counter argument for you. You can probably look back at what happened in the college football playoff scenario, leaving Florida State out, an unbeaten or, an undefeated Power 5 team that won their conference and beat SEC squads and everything else being left out as a signal to the ACC, you're worthless. You do not hold the same amount of clout as the SEC and the Big Ten, because look at the teams that are actually participating in the college football playoff. You have a current SEC member in Alabama and a future SEC member in Texas. You have a current Big Ten team in Michigan and a future Big Ten opponent in Washington. This is going to be the future of the college football playoff. You're going to have essentially the NFC and the AFC, the SEC and the Big Ten, through all of their moves to position themselves as the power brokers of college football. The SEC, if you want to break it down by television, as we like to do, you have your Disney arm in the same way that the AFC is on CBS. And then you have Fox controlling the Big Ten side of things in the same way that they control the NFC. So these are 2 television products with the biggest brands. They've made the moves for the biggest brands, and that's what's going to populate the college football playoff when they expand to 12, which would give me great anxiety, bubble guts, however you want to put it, if you're an AD or a head coach at a current ACC squad that cares about football, because you will be lucky to get one team and one team only. You're going to be the conference champ.
They're going to have a
They're going to have a qualifier, and that's all you're ever going to get. Out of the 12 teams, you're going to get one ACC squad because this committee and the way the TV plays out has signaled to everybody the ACC is viewed as a lesser league compared to these two. Now, all of that, again, this is decades in the making. But this gets me to Jim Phillips. Jim Phillips was brought in to take the ACC to the next step. And the presidents decided, we want to hold the status quo.
I was going to say, was he? He was brought in as someone who was a lifer.
Yes.
Not a changer.
Not a changer. We are going to hold this together like we want it. We don't want anything to change. We like it how it is. We like our neighborhood, if you will. Where's my, we got to
protect the fortress.
Got to protect the fortress, okay? We got to protect our little gated community, right? So I put that on the presidents for hiring Jim Phillips in the first place, rather than getting a disruptor that understood where things were going. So that was failure number one. All right, now you have Jim Phillips in charge of things. Jim Phillips is not Greg Sankey. He's not even Brett freaking Yormark, man. Those guys make themselves readily available. I'm not talking about like a local podcast like ours or a local sports talk radio station. They don't even make them. Jim Phillips doesn't even make himself available on his own propaganda arm, the ACC network. When Greg Sankey wants to set the tone, what does Greg Sankey do?
Goes on the SEC network or ESPN proper.
Or ESPN proper or with Feinbaum. He is ready. All right, I got my talking points. I send them to the masses and everybody picks it up and runs with it. Jim Phillips does not do that. So this week, much like the NCAA tournament last year, when everybody was freaking out about the amount of teams that were going to be involved, you have to be front and center arguing on behalf of your conference. Now, I know what the response is. Well, you know, he's going to lose that fight. I don't care. You still got to go out there and fight. You got to fight. And at no point does Jim Phillips look like a guy that actually wants to fight for the conference. He does not want to fight for the coaches. He does not want to put himself in a position where he is starting the narrative conversations, and then those things go out to the people who start the conversations in college football. You fight with your own network partner to get an actual Feinbaum-like person on these shows. The ACC does not have that. They've never had that. It's not in their nature. I don't know why. And that ultimately is them getting screwed over and why the death of the ACC was only accelerated after this. Again, I'm not trying to bag on Jim Phillips because he's a symptom of a larger problem with the ACC. But I'm sorry. It's a complete failure on Jim Phillips's fart. It was a big fart. It's a big fart. That's all it was. Jim Phillips should have gone on TV and farted. That's what I think about this process. That's what I would have done. This is another one of like every single one of your moves to do something has backfired, or you're just too little too late. You know, like look, conference expansion and adding SMU and Cal and Stanford. I'm sorry, but clearly you're seeing how people view the ACC going forward. Right?
I actually also think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because the stated reason for adding those three teams, now props to SMU, but the stated reason
they won the American
for adding those three teams was, well, we're about to lose Florida State and Clemson, so we have to be ready for when they leave.
And
so it's again, like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And this gets to my ultimate point that people view the ACC as not a Power 5 conference anymore. They're basically being positioned as a group of 5 team that will get included in the college football playoff with their conference champion, and that's about it. Because if I'm Florida State, man, I'm not riding with the ACC. It's clearly seen how it's viewed. And here's the other reason why I would be pissed at Jim Phillips right now. The Alliance.
Ooh.
Do you know
on the list of bad ideas?
I was so thrown off that I said fart that I forgot about this point. You want to talk about things that you wish you could take back. You and I at the time, we have to be honest. Okay. We cannot retroactively act as though we saw this coming. But at the time, I think you and I both agreed that the only thing that Jim Phillips had in his disposal to get a handle on where things were going with college football was the Alliance. Kind of gum up the works. Did we not agree about that? Did we? Maybe not.
I don't think we're retconning anything here.
Well, maybe not.
We laughed that day at do you have like a contract? It was like this completely nebulous idea that we all sat in a room and looked at each other in the eyes and said,
if you can't trust what the man says.
We have a blood oath.
So, come on. Okay, so I'm trying to remember how it all played out in my head in real time here. But the point here is that I was of the mind that the Alliance was the only thing they really had in order to stop what the SEC was trying to create, which was control of college football playoff, control of the college football playoff model, and Trojan horsing the additions of Texas and Oklahoma
Yeah.
to expand the college football playoff along with Notre Dame, right? Speaking of wonderful partners, Notre Dame. But the biggest mistake was that Jim Phillips trusted that in a world of people who you can't trust, he could trust. That in the history of college athletics, where every school and every conference is ultimately going to do what's in their best interest, that he could look a man in the eye and be like, yep, this alliance is going to work. We're going to hold it down, and we're going to hold these truths to be self-evident, and we're going to make sure that the model exists. Of course, that was a mistake because the Big Ten went, cool, we're now going to speed up the destruction of the Power 5 conferences. Do you know what would have started this year had it not been for the alliance?
In theory, the 12-team playoff.
Yeah. But because Jim Phillips gummed up the works with the alliance, and that it ended up getting delayed, and they have to work out models, XYZ, and everything else. And of course, there's been other things that have gone on too, but that was one of the reasons why things ended up getting delayed. So again, Jim Phillips has made mistakes along the way or played it wrong. And if you take anything from this portion of the conversation, it comes down to one real simple thing. The ACC presidents hired a guy who's bad at political football. Terrible at political football, and these are the consequences. In the same way that the Pac-12 hired a guy that was bad at reading the room, bad at negotiating television contracts, bad in seeing where the landscape was going, and that ultimately led to their destruction. Who you hire matters. Who you hire to take you into the next chapter of your existence matters. And the ACC got it wrong with Jim Phillips. I'm sorry. They got it wrong. And as much as I can put blame on Jim Phillips, you got to remember, much like in the NFL with Roger Goodell, he is a meat shield for the decisions that the owners ultimately want. He works for the owners in the same way that Jim Phillips is the one that is working with the presidents and their decision-making. And they got it wrong, and now we're here.